I want to talk about COVID-19, the coronavirus, from a different perspective. And that's this perspective of a historian. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a medical doctor. I am a doctor. I have a PhD in history. And I think that gives me a different perspective that I haven't seen in the news or on TV or read about with regard to this virus. The other day, I had to pick up a prescription at Walgreens. And it's Florida, it's May, it's the summer. So I went up dressed as I usually would dress. I had shorts on, short sleeve shirt, no gloves, no mask, sunglasses. I went in to pick up my prescription. And there was another guy in there. I saw him in one of the aisles. He was about my age, taller than me, probably, I would say, I don't know exactly what's up with him, but better shape than me. At least he looked like he was in better shape. But he's wearing long pants, long sleeve shirt. He's got latex gloves on both hands. He's got this big mask. And he's carrying around a spray bottle of disinfectant. And everything he goes to look at on the shelves as I'm walking by, and before he picks it up, he's spraying it with God knows what. Clorox. I don't know what he had in there. It was an unlabeled bottle. But he sprayed, he looked it up. Spray it, he looked it up. So I didn't go down his aisle because I figured I don't even want to walk past this guy. I'll probably freak him out. So I went over a different way and picked up my prescription. And they had changed one of my doses, so they wouldn't give it to me until I talked to the pharmacist who was up in the front of a store for doing something else. So I had to wait till she came back. So in the meantime, this guy comes to the desk where the pharmacy technician is, which is now behind a plexiglass wall with little places you can push things through. And I see him coming, so I figure I better get out of this guy's way. He doesn't, So I just move totally away from there so that I would be on the aisle as the pharmacist who was up front. I had seen her when I came in. I knew where she was. Would come back and run into me. And that way this guy could go up and ask whatever question he had of the pharmacy tech. And they have a little 6-foot line. He doesn't go anywhere near a 6-foot line. He's at least 12 feet from the pharmacy tech. And he's 12, 15 feet from me. So he gets up to that line and she says, "Can I help you?" Now this woman's Indian. I've known her for 3 years, 4 years maybe. She speaks excellent English. She has no problem understanding anybody that I've ever seen at any time in 3 years. This has nothing to do with her. But here's this guy, 12 feet away, with a mask. And I could hardly understand him. And I'm not as far from him as the pharmacy tech, who's on the other side of this plexiglass wall. And she's going, like, "Come closer, I can't understand you." And he just yells louder now, that maybe he'll be heard that way. And he's getting obviously aggravated because he doesn't want to come closer. He doesn't want to get 6 feet. I mean, this guy's like a dozen feet. And finally he gets fed up and he says something under his breath about her and he walks away. And meanwhile, she's called somebody from the front to come down and try to help him. If they can get close enough to understand what he's saying. I couldn't understand what he was saying, let alone, this woman whose first language is in English. And when I got home, I was thinking about that. I said, we're roughly the same age. I mean, I'm 68. I had a kidney transplant. I take drugs every day that suppress my immune system. I mean, if anybody's likely to get this virus, you would think it would be me. But why am I in there with no gloves, no mask, no spray bottle of disinfectant? And this guy's in there, won't even come within 10 feet of people. It's a proverbial 10-foot pole he could have been carrying. Why the difference? I mean, in all likelihood, I'm more likely to get the disease than he is. So why am I not in panic mode and this guy is in panic mode? And I thought, well, it could be, do we just fear death less? I mean, maybe he's never had a run-in with death. I've had a couple. And, after the first one, you do get kind of wouldn't say immune, but it doesn't hit you the same way. I lived for 6 months thinking I had pancreatic cancer, which was a misdiagnosis. It was the summer Patrick Swayze died. Every day in the news, it was Patrick Swayze death watch. And I'm thinking, oh my God. I mean, I had this thing for 6 months. They couldn't diagnose it. They weren't treating me. And in those days, the life expectancy of somebody with a pancreatic cancer diagnosis, 5% lived a year. So here I was 6 months and they haven't done anything yet. They're still trying to figure out if I got it or not. So I had reasons to be a little nervous. And it was a great relief when I found out that I didn't. But having lived with the prospect that, I was going to do a Patrick Swayze for 6 months, I think did impact my psyche. Earlier than that, when I was back in my 30s, I was over in the Persian Gulf during the Gulf War in 1988, and I was in a friendly fire incident. It was night, and the trail boat started opening up. We weren't where we were supposed to be, and next thing I know, I've got these 40 millimeter tracer rounds going, zipping past my head. Well, actually, they were coming from the back. You could hear them, see them going by, almost smell them. That was scary. I think it was Churchill said something like, "There's nothing quite as exhilarating as being shot at and missed," and it's true. So was that it? Is that why I'm not wearing gloves, not wearing a long sleeve shirt, not wearing a mask in Walgreens, and this guy's running around with a spray bottle of whatever he had? And I don't think it was. I ultimately came to the conclusion it's because of my training as a historian. As I said, I'm not a medical doctor, but I am a doctor of philosophy. I have a degree in history. And when I think about this disease, I think of it within a historical context. Back when I was in graduate school in the 70s, at that point, a new book had come out by William McNeill called Plagues and Peoples. Now, it's still a great book, and it's still in print today. If you're looking for something to talk about modern pandemics, Ebola, swine flu, those things, that's not it. Again, the book was written in 1974. There have been some updates, but not really. It's a history of the impact of disease on human history. We've been dealing, it's not as disease is a recent phenomenon. We've been dealing with diseases as long as there's been recorded history. Probably before there was recorded history, 10, 20, 30,000 years ago, humans died of disease. I mean, I live in a lake, we have all kinds of ducks. I see some of them die of disease all the time. I see the ducks get sick and then they're gone. They perish. I mean, anybody who knows anything about human history knows about plagues. What killed Athens? Was it the Spartan army or was it the plague? In I think even the American Civil War, more soldiers died of disease than died in combat. In Royal Navy during the Napoleonic Wars, for every one sailor who died in combat, 10 died of disease, accidents, natural causes. So disease, it plays a lot in our lives. I'm from Philadelphia. I was born there, raised there, went to school there. I know, from my studies at least, not that anybody in my family remembered, they weren't even here then, but in 1793, there was a bad yellow fever epidemic in Philadelphia. Now, at that point, they didn't understand the relationship with mosquitoes and everything, but they knew it was something. Yellow jack, the black vomit. There were all kinds of names for yellow fever. Over that season, 5,000 people died in Philadelphia. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but there were only 50,000 people in the city. That's a 10% death rate. Something like that hit New York today, you'd be looking at close to 1 million dead in New York City, and they're not going to get anywhere near that in the whole country on this COVID-19, let alone just in New York City. So disease is nothing new. We've been living with diseases forever. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. One of them is pestilence, disease. That's what gets you. It's famine, civil war, foreign war. Those are the 4 horsemen. They're the ones that call out humanity. Now, I point out that if you look at that history, and I have, I've read about it, I read the papers of people who were around then, there was a great deal of fear in Philadelphia. They didn't lock the city down. They did quarantine ships coming in for 40 days, which is what quarantine basically means in Italian, or the original Italian word. Now, of course, that didn't really work because it wasn't the people who were bringing the disease in. It was the mosquitoes that were coming up from West Indies into ships, and then they just flew off the ships and came into the city and bit people, and bingo, that's what you have. But there was no lockdown, and of course, Philadelphia didn't die off. And eventually, it stopped. They would periodically they would have a little outbreak, but nothing as big as the 1793 outbreak. The other thing that McNeill talked about in his book was how to look at disease. And this is, I think, maybe the most important part of the book and the most important thing I want to talk about. Disease, he explained, is a parasite. Yeah, disease is a parasite. And you have to understand it in that sense. It's a parasite that can kill. But it doesn't always kill. If you look at the progression, the diseases are, after all, what makes a successful parasite? If you think of, a flea. If a flea lands on a cat and bites it and the cat drops dead in 24 hours, is that a successful parasite? Or if a flea lands on the cat, lives on the cat for 2 years, lays eggs, the other fleas jump onto other cats, and so on and so on and so on, is that a successful parasite? The answer is obvious. It's the flea that doesn't kill, which is a successful parasite. And that's true of all diseases. I mean, if remores latch onto a shark, the shark died in 24 hours, the remora wouldn't be as successful as it is as a parasite, clinging onto sharks and eating the waste that comes out of their mouth when they're tearing things apart. The other thing about diseases is, he explained, is you have to look at them as we look at humanity. When we say humanity, we're all human, whether we're from Africa or Asia or the Middle East or Eurasia or wherever. Everybody's a human, but it doesn't mean we're all the same. Some are tall, some are short, some are thin, some are fat, some are light, some are dark, some are quick, some are slow, some are strong, some are weak. And diseases, be it a bacteria or viruses, are the same. When you look at a virus, you look at a virus like it's humanity. And there are all these individuals within that virus, and they're all kind of a little different. We all, as human beings, have more or less the same genetic makeup, but that doesn't mean we all look exactly the same. And it's the same with diseases. And because they're parasites, that means if the more virulent strain of a disease, the stronger virus, lands on somebody, they catch it, and it kills them, that's not a success. If a less virulent strain of a bacteria or a virus lands on somebody, and they catch it, and they survive and they live on, that's a successful parasite, because that's the descendants of that virus, the offspring, are more likely, and I'm really simplifying this here, are more likely to be passed on to others. If you look at the progression of disease in history, when these things hit, they hit hard, and people start dropping fast. That's especially what happened when the Europeans reached the New World. I mean, they literally walked in and breathed on people, and they would drop dead in 48 or 72 hours. But if you look at the progression of those diseases, most of the time, what happens is they become less virulent and then less virulent, and the diseases that have been with us for longest, maybe 10, 20, 30,000 years, some of them become like the common cold. Probably human beings were catching common colds 20,000 years ago. Maybe when it first jumped from the common cold is a coronavirus. Now, when it first jumped maybe from some animal to a human, maybe it wiped out half the people in the group, the hunter-gatherer group, that came into contact with it when they killed some animal. But today, you catch a cold, you're not likely to die. The common cold is probably the most successful disease there is, because from the point of view of a parasite, it doesn't kill you, it lives with you. And we can see that already if you read the reports of a coronavirus. You read a report about some athlete who's in great shape, he's somewhere around 30 years old, no problems, works out all the time, in perfect shape, catches COVID-19, and within a week he's dead. And then you get another guy who's some athlete, and they start testing the team, and it turns out he had COVID-19 quite a while ago. All he can remember is, well, I went through a period, I had like sniffles, clogged up nose, itchy throat. Hardly, it's what they say, asymptomatic is the term that they use. And as we do more testing, we're finding out all these people who somewhere over the last several months actually came into contact with and contracted COVID-19, and it didn't kill them. You say, well, that's because they have better immune systems. And that's probably part of it. But the other part is you would expect, how do you explain the two athletes? One has no symptoms and the other one gets killed. Maybe it's differences in the COVID-19 viruses. Every COVID-19 virus is not exactly the same. Some are weak, some are strong. And that's why when we see these diseases in history that hit, they usually hit hard and then they trail off. And if you wait long enough, some of them actually will become childhood diseases. Who knows what form mumps and chickenpox and measles and German measles and German measles. Please don't go out and beat up any Germans because I use the term German measles. Who knows what form they originally took? When the Europeans landed in the New World, things like chickenpox and measles would wipe out whole Indian villages because they had never encountered these diseases before. But for us, they become childhood diseases. I grew up before we had all these shots. I had chickenpox, I had mumps, I had measles, I had German measles. I'm still alive. Most of the kids, I don't know any kid who died of any of these things. And all my friends had them. Sometimes when, I remember one time I had a party for something, maybe it was my birthday, and every friend who came there, we all ended up out sick. We were all in the same Cub Scout troop, and we were all out sick from school. I don't know who gave it to whom, but we were all infected. But none of us died. And that's because these childhood diseases probably 10, 20, 30,000 years ago might have been as virulent as COVID-19. If you look back to a more recent history, remember Woodstock? If you're my age, you certainly remember Woodstock. I remember Woodstock. I wasn't there, but a lot of people were. Remember that crowd? What was going on while Woodstock was going on? We were getting hit with the Hong Kong flu. Anybody remember? What do you think people are more likely to remember in this country? Woodstock or the Hong Kong flu? I would say Woodstock. You know how many people died of the Hong Kong flu? 100,000 Americans. Now that's when we had about 200 million people in the country. If you made that the population it is today, you'd have 150,000 dead from the Hong Kong flu. Now we may reach that ultimately with COVID-19, but and maybe it would have been higher if we hadn't locked down. So I'm not arguing that, but 150,000 is still, or even 100,000. That's a lot of people to die, and most people are totally unaware of it. Woodstock. And it'd be really interesting if they could track down people who were at Woodstock and see how many of them ended up catching the Hong Kong flu. Because you had all those people in terrible conditions outdoors for days. You would expect, if it had been a really virulent disease, it would have wiped out large numbers of them. The people from Woodstock are dropping like flies, but I don't remember anything like that. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not arguing that COVID-19 is nothing more than a routine flu. It's much more virulent than that, and I understand that. That's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I am trying to make is it will not go away either, in all likelihood. If you look at the normal historical progression of diseases, it'll simply be around but become less virulent. It might be back. The Hong Kong flu is still around, but it doesn't kill 100,000 people every year. It kills maybe 1,000 or less. Who knows? because we have all these different flus that are killing people, and it varies from state to state. Florida, last flu season, 30,000 people died. We're not near that for COVID-19 yet. And most of those people were in nursing homes, which is why the governor here took steps early on to make sure that didn't happen, because he didn't want to be responsible for that. They did some things very differently in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York. So I think what's going to happen with COVID-19 is it's not going to go away. Now, hopefully, we'll find treatments for it, whichever form they take. Hopefully, we'll find a vaccine for it, which will lessen the damage. But, even people who get, if you look at these people who are dying, thousands of people dying in nursing homes across the country. My mother died last August, nothing to do with COVID-19, obviously. But she's been in a nursing home for a year and a half. All those people, just like when I used to get dialysis, the clinic I went to, they're all given flu shots. But even with the flu shots, fewer people get the flu. But people still get the flu, and they still die. So that's what's likely to happen with COVID-19. It'll be back next year in some less virulent form, because the more virulent strains of COVID-19 will die with their victims. The more successful strains of COVID-19 are the ones that leave people asymptomatic. I mean, there's no better way as a parasite to spread yourself throughout the population to have an impact on somebody that's so minimal that he doesn't even know he's sick, and that he's out there spreading around to the rest of his family, to his friends, to his coworkers. I mean, that's the ultimate successful virus, is the strain of the virus that's in the people that are asymptomatic. The less successful type of the virus is the virus that hits that 30-year-old athlete who's in perfect shape and kills him in 5 days, because that virus is less likely to be able to spread. It's more likely to be buried or cremated with the man's body. Now, all this, from a historical point of view, looks like it's going to hold true. We may even already be seeing elements of it happening, where the death rates are going down. I mean, in Florida, the infection rates keep going up, but the death rates are like way down. I think yesterday it was like 5 or 6 people died. We were at a high of almost 60 a couple of weeks ago. But the new infections keep popping up. Now, part of that is they've really ramped up testing. And when they're testing, they're catching all these people who were asymptomatic and never even knew they had it. But they add to the numbers. So you could have, 1,200 new cases. But it could be that 1,000 of those cases, I don't know all the numbers, but it could be, in theory, that 1,000 of those people didn't even know they had it and were asymptomatic. So all these numbers can be, you have to be careful. One of the things and you can't reinterpret, is that people die. So it is good to keep track of the death rate and expect to see it go down. Because if the numbers of infections stay up and the percentage of people who get infected die stays the same, the death should not drop. Unless you have this, less virulent strain working its way through the population. So ultimately, I think COVID-19, well, it's not going to disappear, and it's not a routine flu now, will in maybe several years, increasingly over the years, become something like a routine flu that will still be around. Just as Hong Kong flu is still around, swine flu is still around, H1N1 is still around. All these things are still around. SARS, MERS, they're all around. It's just they're not hitting us the same way that they hit us when they first hit. And that's because they follow the same pattern of becoming less deadly as the years pass. Now, one thing that would change all this would be, and I'm just throwing it out there, I'm not claiming that this is the case, and I hope to hell it isn't. If indeed, now this leaked from the Wuhan seafood market, as the Chinese claim, or even if it leaked from one of their labs accidentally, really doesn't make a difference. if it's just a bat virus that can be transmitted to humans. If, however, this is indeed a product that some people have claimed, I'm not claiming it. If this is in fact a virus that has been bioengineered by people, cutting out certain sequences and splicing in other sequences from other disease, as some have claimed, then everything I just said here, we don't know how it's going to pan out. But again, that's not an argument I'm making. It's not even an argument I'm suggesting. It's an argument that I hope to hell is not true. And I haven't really seen somebody with, there's sort of circumstantial evidence, but nothing that, I consider convincing. But no matter where it came from, it really doesn't matter. But again, I think the reason that I wasn't in a panic compared to this guy is because when I look at this, and as I've looked at this for months, I see it through this prism of my training as a historian who has had to study. I did naval history. You can't write naval history age of sail and not understand about disease, whether it's scurvy or other things that sailors get, venereal diseases. That's all part of what's happening on ships and trying to keep ships healthy. That's what it means to be a successful captain. If your the crew's half dead, you're not going to fight very well. So as, military historians especially, you have to look at these things. So when I look at COVID-19, I see it through that prism. It's not the end of the world. If I'm not careful, it might be the end of my world, but it's not going to be the end of the world. Next year when it comes back, it won't be as bad, if it comes back at all. And the year after that, there's a certain progression to diseases. And, history, that's just the way history's been. This isn't something that just started. We've been doing this for a long time. And as the further you go back, the less tools we had to struggle with these diseases. They were even more deadly than they are now. And that's understanding just how deadly COVID-19 is. From a historical point of view, this isn't that bad. This isn't Philadelphia in 1793 where 10% of the population is going to be dead and they'll die quickly. So that's just what I wanted to talk about today, that, to bring some historical perspective to this and hope that, in your life, try to avoid being the guy with, totally covered up. He reminded me of I forget the name of a console computer game where it's like a post-nuclear apocalyptic world and everybody's walking around with these helmets with gas masks and, shooting each other and looking for food and stealing things. That's what I thought about when I saw him. He looked like the part of the cover for, I think the game's Fallout or something like that. And that's what he reminded me of. I think it was the cover of this computer game for, the Sony PlayStation or something. You don't need to be that worried. Again, I'm not saying just go out carelessly and expose yourself to coronavirus. What I'm saying is, I don't lose sleep over this. I take my precautions. I'm careful. I've been trying to keep myself healthier. Which is good. I've actually lost weight. I'm exercising more. Taking vitamin D, trying to get in the sun every day, even if we can't couldn't go out past the house. I can still sit in my yard. That's not illegal yet. And to try to ride this thing out. That's what I suggest the rest of you do too. So hope you enjoyed this. Get something out of it.